I see a lot of members, but if you are on Facebook and you're a guest, welcome. And Raymond is a guest. He's from Kentucky. And this is his first time. So welcome all. We're going to hear from our guest speaker first, and then we're going to have a business meeting afterwards so that he doesn't have to stay and hear about bylaws and how we're going to do things. And
I wanted to hear all that. I'm a mole from another writers group, actually. I was here to see how you conduct business.
I see. Well, well, I hope someone is taking notes, because this will be a wonderful example of how not to do things, I'm sure. We're going to talk about our anthology and about our next speaker. I'm very excited about our speaker for next month, Michael Bracton. Michael is, if you don't know, an author of 131 published stories. He's an editor of the Black Cat magazine. He's written several books. He's edited several anthologies. And I thought, with our anthology running apace, that we should hear from someone like this and see if we can't hone our skills. Speaking of which, I want to thank the anthology committee. You have been doing yeoman service. I know my short story is worlds better because of your suggestions, and I'm hoping that everyone else feels the same. So thanks to Angelin and Jim and Dee and Carolyn. Who have I left out? Yeah, that's it. Your anthology committee. It is a lot of work, folks. These people need a big hand. It is a lot of work. Also, thanks to Lynn, who has not only got Chris to speak to us this month, but also is doing our audio and all our technical stuff, which is just a horrible job, in my opinion. So, well, I mean, let's be real. If the technology was left to me, we wouldn't be having any meetings. We'd be having email chains. Mm-hmm. So thanks to Lynn. Lynn, I'm going to turn it over to you until we'll have the rest of our meeting after Chris speaks.
Okay, excellent. Well, I have muted everyone's phone, our audio, so that way we don't have any feedback or dogs barking or kids or anything else taking place. And I want to thank everyone for attending. For those who are not Malice members, there's a couple of people out there. I'm Lynn Maples, and I'll be moderating today's session. And for those who are joining us that are not Malice members, we want to extend a warm welcome and thank you for taking an interest in Malice and in our special guest, Christopher Rice. And for those who are not familiar with Christopher, shame on you. He has been a New York Times bestseller since his first publication at the age of 22. Christopher Rice is the author of Bone Music, an Amazon Charts bestseller, and the I'm sorry, I'm going to back up. And the first novel, the Burning Girl series, and its sequel, Blood Echo, as well as the Bram Stoker finalists, The Heavens Rise and The Vines. Blood Victory is his third Burning Girl novel, and it was released August 2020. He is an executive producer on the television adaptation of The Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice, his mom, if you didn't know. And he also collaborated with her on Ramses the Damned, The Passion of Cleopatra, a sequel to her phenomenally popular novel, The Mummy or Ramses the Damned. Together with his best friend and producing partner, New York Times bestselling novelist Eric Shaw Quinn, he runs the podcast and video network TDPS, that would be The Dinner Party Show, which you can find at www.thedinnerpartyshow.com. And then you can also visit his website at christopherricebooks.com. Christopher, thank you for being our guest today.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for being my social interaction for the month.
Well, and you know, we've been Jackie's out in California where Chris is, and we've all been kind of keeping in touch. I emailed Chris yesterday and said I halfway expected him to say that he couldn't do it because the world was coming to an end and everything was burning down. So I'm really pleased that he's here and able to speak. Members have submitted questions, and so we're going to do a Q&A format. And I'll just start off with the first one, which is, what is the first thing that you ever wrote that made you think, I want to be a writer?
What happened is I went to college believing that the theater department there was just waiting for my acting genius. And the theater department made it pretty clear they were not. And I did not get called back for a single audition my freshman year. And it was a huge blow to my ego because I had been Mr. Theater guy in high school. I had directed stuff, I had written the programs, I had done everything. And I had my outlet taken away, basically is what happened. And so I would go back to my dorm room, usually late at night. I would put on a pair of headphones. I would listen to the musical score from the movie Heat. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. It was Al Pacino. It was one of the few movies Al Pacino and Robert De Niro did together. It's a bank heist movie. It's so 90s. It's such a visual film. I love it. But anyway, it has this minimalist electronic score. And I would put those headphones on. I would listen to it. And I would write some pretty bad plays. That's really what I did. I was writing these plays that were really kind of like off the cuff. There were a lot of revenge fantasies. There were a lot about getting back at people who had done me wrong, in my mind at least, at 19. And I finished one. And up until that point, I hadn't really finished anything. I'd started a lot of things, but I hadn't seen anything through to completion. And there was something about telling myself I was just going to write a screenplay, although it's a very challenging endeavor that brings with it a whole different set of challenges from a novel. But it would seem shorter in my mind, and other people were going to have to do the hard work. It brought the task down to a level of stakes where I felt like I could crest the hill. So I finished this just bonkers script. I mean, it was just crazy for this super gay thriller that was just nobody would ever have made in a million years. I never would have been able to sell it, but it was a complete thing. And I cannot emphasize the power of having a finished thing, even if it's not very good, even if it's not ready, good, bad. It's like, it's either ready, it's either edited, or it's not. And I've always tried to draw inspiration and power from that feeling because it reminds me that the single most important thing I can do is get a finished first draft. And so it was a script that little threads of it went on to live in other things, but it did not ever have a life on its own beyond the very significant impact of giving me the confidence to really make a go of it. And so to wrap up the timeline of that, as a result of that script, I transferred out of the school that I was in, because they may have had practical writing courses, but they didn't have any practical film courses. It was all film theory. And I found some papers that I had written for that class, and I don't know what I was talking about. I was talking about whatever the professor wanted me to talk about, but we never mentioned a filmmaker's name. We never talked about suspense or narrative or character. It was blah, 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 blah. So I transferred to a film school, to their dramatic writing program, where I lasted a whole 6 months before I dropped out.
Okay. Well, obviously you fell in love with writing and pursued it as a career, and acting seemed to be what you were going to be, or at least that's what you thought. But if you hadn't become a writer, what would you have grown up to be?
An academic, probably. I came from, my father was a college professor, and my mother was a big reader, but also a big student of history and a lover of history. And I think that was the environment that I was fostered in. But my dad was really clear: do not go into academia, he said, because he felt it would kill your dreams. I said that on a college event once, and everyone was like, shh, don't listen to him. But he was someone who I think he'd gotten tenure at a university when he was very young. And I don't know if that was a reflection of how he felt about it, that he felt like that cushy teaching job made him write less or whatever. He was in creative writing, so it wasn't the publish or perish stuff that a lot of professors in other fields have to deal with. So I thought that was an interesting statement, but I probably would have, I loved reading so much and I loved studying things. as long as there were no numbers of any kind involved. I was great. As long as it was like history or English or political science, anything that was entirely language driven, I think I would have gone that direction.
So let's talk about the elephant in the room that seems everyone sent me questions on. You're the son of a notable author who has sparked the imagination of thousands with her books and her dark tales. And was it intimidating to go into writing and to be a writer, knowing how successful your mother was?
I can see now the things I used to talk myself into it. In the beginning, it was, well, I'm just going to write screenplays. I'm going to be a dramatic writer, a very dramatic writer, right? I'm not going to ever write a book. That was not my plan. That 19-year-old in his college dorm room didn't think he was ever going to write a book. And so I got around it that way. And when I did write a book, it was almost by accident. And it was because she almost died. She had diabetes and she wasn't diagnosed, and she went into ketoacidosis, which if anybody has any familiarity, that's like, you need to go to an emergency room immediately. You are literally digesting yourself because your blood sugars are completely out of control. And it turned out she was insulin dependent. And so I had moved out to LA at this point after dropping out of school, was called suddenly back home, wasn't going to leave anytime soon. This was way before cloud computing, or maybe the era of floppy disks. I didn't have any of my files for my screenplays I've been working on. I just had this really dark, weird short story, and I started tinkering with it, and I just kept tinkering, and I just kept tinkering. And then after 3 months, it was novel length. It was not a finished novel by any means, but it was novel length. And I never thought I could do that. So if I had sat down and tried to make the 5-year plan to go into my mother's profession, I would have completely freaked out. I don't think I ever would have been able to do it. But I just sort of followed my instincts and followed the family drama, the personal family drama, and that's how it came about. But I took confidence from the fact that our writing styles were so different that we could not be easily confused. It's a weird thing to say now that we've written together, but when we wrote together, it was in a world she had already built. It wasn't something we invented together. It was me sort of like being a visiting writer in the universe of her mummy novels. So that's a different thing, and not something I could have done back at the beginning. But in the beginning, I really felt there was such a distinction thematically and stylistically that people were never going to confuse us, and it was going to allow me to kind of have my own space.
Yeah, that makes sense. I did have a last minute question that came in that wanted to know, in what way did your mother or your mother's career influence you in becoming a writer, and has her success boosted or hindered you in your career in any way?
Well, I certainly don't think it's hindered. I think it's been a blessing and a privilege way more than it's been anything else. And I'm not sure I would have been published as early as I was and with the marketing power that I was if I hadn't been her son. And so I always try to be very upfront about that. I think that it was a pretty crowded marketplace then. It's way more crowded now. And so anything that allows you to stand out, get anybody's attention, could be either a liability or a hindrance. They could say, okay, I've got a BookBub email here with 30 discount ebooks. What do I care about Anne Rice's son for? He doesn't need my help. Or it's, oh, that made him stand out from the 30 other books in this newsletter. So you just never know, I think, on that front. In terms of inspiration, I think the inspiring thing is that she really didn't plan to be a success, because she really didn't. She just really didn't think my transgressive, deeply homoerotic vampire novels were going to be bestsellers. That was just not in the cards for her. But, and so there's always that inspiring aspect of her story of really following your instinct and not trying to predict what's going to be a hit. A lot of people don't write to be a hit, and that's fine. They write because they want to write. And I think that's the entry fee. You have to at least want to write. But with her, it was really a matter of following her real dream and staying authentic to that and staying true to that over the course of her career, even when it wasn't what everybody wanted. So I don't know. I am, in my own approach to the writing side, I'm a pretty business centric. Like, I like to put out a book that's got a shot at selling. But that's because those are the books I like and I read. And I think the greatest piece of advice she ever gave me was, write the book you want to read. Because if you're not writing a book you want to read, what are you doing? Like, this is way too much work to be writing something you don't want to read. So I think all of that sort of works together.
Okay. Well, how about creating your own voice in the writing world? Because obviously you do have a distinction. You've written several different styles, several different genres. You do romance, you do suspense and thriller, you even do short stories. How do you go about doing that?
Well, I think that your voice comes from what you read. I really do. I think reading a lot of what I love and being inspired by it and having I invite it to shape my voice. Like, I'm not one of those writers who says, well, I'm working, so I can't read anything for the next 6 months. I would quit writing if that was the requirement, because I love to read way too much. Now, if that's not you, I mean, some people are saying if I read a British mystery at night, my Western, they all start talking like lords, and I gotta, so, and there can be sort of nuanced ways you go about that. Like, I only read certain things when I'm working on this type of story, but I play with that a lot. And I think shifting between genres, I go on like a genre binge. Okay, I'm going to do a romance now. Time to read all my favorite romance authors and marinate in it, So I think that's a part of it. But I think your voice, it's like water finding its own level. I think if some other things are in alignment, like if you're following that piece of advice of, it's a book that you're passionate about, it's a book that you want to write. And sometimes the thing that makes you passionate about the book is that they're going to pay you a check at the end. I mean, sometimes we have to take work to stay in the game, but that's passion. Wanting to pay the rent is passion.
Oh, yeah.
So, but all of that, I think if those things are in alignment and you're engaged, I think your voice is going to emerge. I think that there can sometimes be a conversation that gets a little airy-fairy for me around, are the voices of all the different characters distinct? And I think you work on that as much as you can, but I think the ultimate voice of the novel is yours. It really is. It's yours.
Okay. Well, the universal question that came across from others is your writing process. Do you start with an outline, or are you a pantser? Does it just come to you from your story development to character outlining and research? What do you do that gets you to churn out those words on a daily basis?
Well, for starters, it's not always a daily basis. So there's that. And I think that give yourself credit for the things that you are doing, even if it includes 2 hours of researching the etymology of the last name for this character that needs to be right. You don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, because research can turn into procrastination really quickly. But I think only judging yourself in terms of daily word count can be cruel and unforgiving. I think that whatever is keeping you engaged with the idea and moving it forward. One of the best, I think, I'm like a sponge for tips from writers who are successful, but not just because they have a lot of sales, but because they've kept doing it consistently over the years. Sometimes if their sales spike and sometimes their sales fall, which happens a lot more for successful writers than you may be aware of. Like, they may stay in the game, but this book was over here, and then but they went away from their series and publisher made them come back. So, but the people who really stuck with it, and David Morrell, I don't know if a lot of people know who that is, but he wrote First Blood, which became Rambo. And he has a book out there. He was a college professor, Lessons from a Lifetime of Writing, and it was published by an academic press, so it's actually not that easy to find. It wasn't like Stephen King's writing book. But he talked about keeping a journal about the idea, like a log, and he would go in every day, and rather than this was his version of the outline, he was sort of chronicling how he felt about the idea each day, but also I think embracing the fact that the arrival of ideas about a book, it comes in a nonlinear fashion. And a lot of what I think works best in terms of outlining process, they do this a lot in TV, right? When they want to break an hour of television, they've got a whiteboard in their writer's room, and now they have mostly magnetic wipe-off cards, right? And they put a scene on a card and they throw it up on the board, right? They're not always in order. And the process throughout the day in the room is often in arranging those cards. Okay, where should this scene with this character go? The shape takes place afterwards, but you get these little bursts of inspiration. And I think if you are too wedded to the idea of, I need to write a research paper style outline, you can sort of tamp down on that fire a little bit too much. So if you've got some sort of process that allows you to take these ideas as they come in, park them somewhere, and then make a commitment to really put them in a finished order later in the process. So the short answer is I outline until I get sick of outlining, and then I start writing. And it's very rare that I have a complete detailed outline of the whole book. I usually reach critical mass. I've got enough to start, and I have a sense of true north where I want to hit, but you always have to give yourself permission to depart from the outline. An outline is not a finished book. And if I hold myself prisoner to it, I will make myself really frustrated.
That's a relief. As someone who tries to find, who has a job, a 9-to-5 job, and trying to find time, that is a relief. To hear you as a professional that has written dozens of books that you operate like that. So thank you. You're also one of those authors that has crossed all the genres of telling a story you tell, from suspense, crime, supernatural thrillers, and erotic to romance. How are you able to bounce back and forth and not be labeled into just one genre? Because it seems like whenever you want to get published, they want to peg you into a certain thing.
I wonder if we're at a turning point with this, because I was listening to an interview with J.N. Krentz, who's a big romance and mystery author, and she talked about how when she wanted to branch out into different genres years ago, they made her use pen names. And she then went on to say how almost impossible that is to do in the age of social media, because what that means is a different social media account for every pen name. And I wonder if that, the extent to which the publishers rely on authors to self-market on social media, is going to drive them to see that all of those, all the content needs to come from the channel that's the most visible, or it needs to be promoted there. You know, it's one thing, Nora Roberts is so huge, and J.D. Robb became huge kind of at the same time. It makes sense for her to have those two identities, but it says Nora Roberts writing as J.D. Robb. Like, they're not making it a secret. So, you know, part of the answer for me specifically is that the erotic romances were published in a different way. They were not published by a traditional publisher. And however, the traditional publisher that I initially engaged with about them, who was interested, said, you will have to publish these as Christopher Rice. And the reason is because the last name was Rice. You know, so that was a special circumstance in my case, that nobody was going to let me use a pen name. It's like, you know, unless it was Tom Rice in giant letters. So I had to deal with that in a way that a lot of other authors might. But I do think that we are seeing, as I said at the beginning, I think we are seeing the increased amount of labor that has to go into social media marketing of various pen names is going to lead to a new conversation about this issue. But, you know, what I typically find is that I'm known more for one thing than others. And that may be the public link in people's minds to my mother, that they just know me more for suspense, that the romances are not necessarily as well known as the other stuff. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, we are living in the age of Amazon. And when they plug your name into Amazon, if you've claimed all your books in your author portal, which hopefully you've been able to do, it's all there for anyone to find. It's not like, there's a lot that was about the shelf space, the physical shelf space in the store, that's going away. And that doesn't mean all the stores are going away or they're not going to come back after the pandemic. It just means that a lot of the business rules were about the fact that an author was only going to be on that shelf for a certain period of months, and then they were going to get re-merchandised. So you had to do, everything you did was about that short window of time, and it got shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. And that's not necessarily true anymore.
Okay. Well, I'm going to be honest with you. One of the first things that I read of your mother's, and then I ended up later reading some of your stuff, was your mother's The Taming of Sleeping Beauty.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the claiming of Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah, the claiming of
Tame Sleeping Beauty, or maybe they do. I think that's the whole point. I have not read them, so yes.
Okay, I was going to ask how did you take it when she started writing erotica, and then you switched and started doing some as well?
Well, here's on the Dinner Party Show, we have two podcasts at the Dinner Party Show. We have the current one, which is Christopher and Eric, which is all talk, and then we did the Dinner Party Show was a lot of sketch comedy, which we pre-recorded, and we did a sketch called "How Far Can Christopher Get Reading His Mother's Porn?" And the answer was 1 minute and 30 seconds. The last minute, we recorded it, we aired it. It's weird to read your mom's erotica, but she didn't read mine at all. She really didn't. And I think for that reason, it was just too intimate. But that said, we wrote a sex scene, not together, but I wrote the first version of it, and then she changed it because she said, I clearly don't know how women feel. And she rewrote it. And that was in the Ramses novel. And that occasioned some conversation on Goodreads, you know, the mom-son collaboration on a love scene. So it doesn't feel that weird, but I think the Sleeping Beauty novels are such a specific fantasy. That was really one of the first things. Well, the first thing she said is you can't read them until you're 21. And I was like, not 18? Like, what's the drinking age rule about? And then I snuck them earlier and realized I wasn't going to want to. But it was fun to go out on my first dates after I came out with guys who were like, I really love your mom's erotica, because that wasn't weird at all. So that happened, but they're a very specific fantasy, which is, they're about a fantasy of dominance and submission, and that's either your thing or it's not. It's not really my thing. So that, on top of the fact that my mother wrote it, means I've never read it.
Well, I remember having to hide it from my mom whenever I was in college.
Yeah.
So, but then, you know, years later, it was very, very satisfying whenever I found her copy of 30 Shades of Grey. So I was able to throw it back at her. So well, I have another question about your early books. Someone said that they were rather dark and really suspenseful. How do you think that you've evolved as a writer, and what are your influences that causes you to change or not?
Well, it's really strange to start. I mean, it's a gift, but it's also really weird to have a major publication when you're 22, because who you are when you're 22 and who you are when you're 43 are very different people. And I don't know if 43-year-old me would be able to sit at a dinner table with 22-year-old me for very long without rolling his eyes and walking off, you know? So there is a sense of the things that are very serious to you as a young person are not quite as serious to you later. But that doesn't mean the books are worth any less. They're like a snapshot of that emotional reality at that point in your life. I think that the you know, Bone Music, which the Burning Girl series, is plenty dark, but there's more of an almost superhero vein running through it. There is a greater degree of hope, I think, and optimism. But if left unchecked, I will go very dark. That's really that's the thing. And I guess now I am more invested in trying to tell stories with more of a resolution at the end. There's a resolution at the end of Density of Souls, and there's a resolution at the end of Snow Garden. But I think there was one critic who said these books are going to resonate with people who still think adulthood is a terrifying place, you know, because they're young, they're like on the threshold of adulthood, and that's how they read. Probably the darkest book I ever wrote, and it was a very difficult experience for me because it performed well below expectations. I'd been paid a fair amount of money for it, and it didn't do that well. Was a novel called Light Before Day, and that was not the book I had originally been contracted to write. I wrote it right after my father died a horrible death from a brain tumor. There was a lot of other changes happening, but it was really, really close to my dark little heart. And people who had been very enthusiastic about the first two books were like, whoa, man, you know, like, and it's a hard-boiled, bleak detective novel. So I think in some sense I may have been a little chafed by that experience, you know. But at the same time, who I was as a person changed. I'm just not as dark a person. I'm not as dark and depressive a person I was when I first started writing.
So are there certain themes that tend to play out in your work? And if so, could you share them and tell us why those themes exist for you?
Sure. I saw a joke the other day on Twitter. I don't know who said it, but it was the theme of every book is basically things are not what they appear to be. You know? And I think the theme that was prevalent in my early books were that your secrets can kill you. And obviously that was something that was important to a newly out gay person, you know, that your secrets can tear you apart. Having lived in the closet, having seen other people live in it and the damage it could do to them, but that was a universal theme that was true across a broad variety of types of people, not just gay people, right? And that your secrets reveal a lot about you. And there was a quote, I can't remember who the writer was, but it was my yearbook quote. What do you despise? By this you are truly known, right? Like your hatred, what you hate reveals a lot about you. Not necessarily negative, but it reveals your character. So all of that, stories which dredge all of that to the surface very quickly for the characters and force them to deal with it in difficult circumstances, that was really the theme of most of what I wrote in the beginning. I think today, what's clear to me about all of it from the beginning to what I've written now is that if there isn't a compelling network of relationships, I don't really care. I've written books about mind control parasites. I've written, the Burning Girl series is about an experimental drug that only works in one woman and enables her to have 3 hours of super strength when she's terrified. That's her trigger. But all of those big ideas are about the relationships between the people, because I think what you find in popular genre is a lot of the time you're telling a story that has been told before, or let's say that has tropes, classic universal tropes in it, but your way of telling it is going to be about those relationships. And so that's what matters to me. And I think that's why I am comfortable moving across those genre lines. Romance was a natural fit to me because it was also about relationships. They were just front and center and in front of everything else.
Well, you've also written a series of books. And one of the questions that we had is that we had another author speak to Malice, and she commented on the pressure of trying to deliver one great book after another and talk about how overwhelming that feeling could be to try to live up to the expectation of the reader, the sellers, and so forth. What is your mindset in your practice for riding through those expectations and the high standards that are set?
There's really nothing you can do to control the outcome of a book in the reader's mind. There's really nothing you can do. Every moment I have tried to write to expectations, I've been slapped on the face by the results. Like there have been books where the publisher said, this is what we think you should do. This is what we want out of you. And then it comes out and, it's like, there are too many unknowns for starters, there are too many unknowns in the publication process. There are too many external factors that can affect the publication. It maybe doesn't end up being a nice, clear line of sight between the publication and the readers, right? The marketing's not where it needs to be. The publicity is not where it needs to be. There's that. But there's also the fact that it's like the William Goldman quote about Hollywood. Nobody knows anything. Nobody knows what the next trend is going to be. Nobody knows, Robert Crace, who's a well-known PI novel, when he started, everyone said to him, the PI novel is dead. What are you doing? Gillian Flynn, how many novels was it before Gone Girl? I mean, my favorite story was Stephanie Meyer. We had something called a media escort when we were on tour. And this is someone local to the city who would drive the author around to their events. And this escort told me the story. She had driven this little known author named Stephanie Meyer to a bookstore where 10 people were there. And she was thinking, I don't know why I'm doing this. This doesn't seem to be working. And the people aren't really excited about my little vampire YA novel. And just suddenly it just happened. So and to her credit, regardless, whatever you think about Twilight and Stephanie Meyer, she went back to that store, did a massive event, and took those 10 people out to dinner who had been at her original event, her first event. So I thought that was cool. The point of all of that is you have to be writing because you like what you're writing, and there's really no telling what comes next. But let me add this, because I think this is important. I think that writers and your relationship to internet comments about your work, you need to undertake that relationship with great care, because there's a community of passionate people on the internet that want to talk about books, that want to review books, that also want to criticize books, right? And that's their thing. And I've been the commenter and I've been the commented on. So I've been in both camps. But I think if writers become hyper-focused on the criticism that's coming at them through those sometimes limited channels, it can bias them in ways that are not good for their work. I think that you need to be doing what you're passionate about, and you need to sort of let go of the results, because I don't ultimately think, even when a book doesn't necessarily do well from a pure sales perspective, it's not because of those 5 negative reviews you read on Amazon. That there's not enough of those to explain the larger performance of what happened. And I think sometimes we will, because we so want an answer, and I think everybody in life wants a formula for success, we'll glom on to those little indicators and will blow them out of proportion in our mind.
Well, let's switch gears from you being a writer to you wearing many hats, because you publishing a book means that writers need to put on the hat of being a marketing expert, public relations person, a guru, a speaker, a travel agent, an accountant. You know, wear whatever hat is needed at that moment to get the book into the hands of a reader. Can you talk about your journey as a writer to a celebrity, to a producer, and now you are basically a legacy keeper for your mom's work that is going into production for TV?
Yeah, you know, I'm trying to remember. Okay, so this was what happened. This was really how, this was the moment when I realized I was going to have to take on a lot of this myself. So we had a book, I had a new book coming out with a major publisher. It was the second book under a contract. So it was the last book under that contract. I called the publisher and I said, what's our marketing plan here? What are we going to do? Is there going to be a tour? Because this was an age when those were still common. Borders was closing. The bookstore chain was closing. The price of the Kindle device had dropped substantially for the first time since its introduction. It had dropped from something like $250 a device to $100. Like, things were changing, and they were changing fast. And his response, the editor's response to me was, well, Glenn Beck has a radio show. And I thought, I knew he edited Glenn Beck. He edited me and Glenn Beck. And I was like, why are you telling me that Glenn Beck is not going to have me on his radio show? Like, you just need to do a little homework about me and my politics to know. And what I realized he was saying was, get a radio show. That's what he was basically, what he was saying was that the authors who were succeeding at a certain level were either attached to other media platforms or building their own. So I don't know if this is something he would have said to just anybody, but I think he thought I could, you know, call the bank of Ann Rice and get a loan for my new radio station. I don't know what the hell. So what I looked into was internet radio, which was a new thing. And the moment everybody thought it was going to be the thing, like podcasts were good. Spoiler alert, internet radio is not the thing, but it was something that we invested in. And I contacted my best friend, Eric Shaw Quinn, who's also a brilliant, hilarious writer. And we said, well, clearly this is an age where you're having to put yourself out there, either on social media or in some way. And we should do something that feels authentic to us and who we are. It's not, politics alone didn't feel like it for us. More sort of satire, comedy, all that sort of stuff. So we started the Dinner Party Show for that reason. And it was about that. And I think, you know, there were some hiccups along the way, but what we were able to do, this is the best advice I ever got about author marketing on social media. And it was true of the show, and it's true of everything I've done on social media. It's not necessarily going to get you hundreds or thousands or millions of new readers. It's going to organize the ones you have in one place. It's a way to sort of talk to all of them together. But I think it's also a great way to get them to a newsletter, because newsletters are still a thing, and big successful authors have not abandoned them because you own your newsletter more than you own the content on social media, meaning that you have more control over, there's less in between you and who's receiving your newsletter, right? So that was really the beginning of realizing that I needed to step out and take up the responsibility of my own publicity and my own marketing. But how you do, there are a lot of different ways to do that. You don't just have to start a podcast. And I don't know if starting a podcast now is the best thing to do, because there are just so many of them. But I think, as with deciding whether or not you're writing a book you're really passionate about, it's like you look at the lay of the landscape and you're like, okay, what can I do as obsessively as I do my writing that's about being out there and about being visible? And the answer is going to be unique to you. And I wouldn't feel limited by what's right in front of you and what's crushingly obvious. Maybe there's something, you know, if it's speaking at writers groups like this, if it's taking a more academic approach to your work. I know writers who wanted to become teachers about craft and strategy, anything that gets you somewhere other than the computer writing your story, talking about what you do.
So how do you balance all of that? I mean, you wear so many hats, it can get overwhelming. I know with me, it can get overwhelming. What process do you use to stay focused and organized while still being able to do your main job, which is writing?
Well, I think, I want to say the pandemic changed some of it, but it changed before the pandemic. And I was working with people who had had a lot of TV experience, and I was seeing what their process was. And it was fascinating because we as novelists have this idea that we need to go into the zone and never leave until we're done. And I don't know if that's necessarily healthy because we can't live like that every day. We have jobs, we have families, we have to get groceries. We can't just go to a cabin in the woods and not emerge until it's done. So some of it was about breaking off the larger writing process into bite-sized pieces, into manageable pieces, like 2 hours in the morning, a break, and then it would be 2 hours on that same project, and then a big break, and then I would start on an afternoon project. And this is something that the pandemic has really allowed me to do because the demands to do the other stuff are less right now. But the TV people inspired me because in their career, it's never financially advantageous to just be working on one thing because they never know what's going to go. TV people they're like writing a pilot in the afternoon that might sell. They're talking to people in the morning. And I studied how they divided up their attention. And what I saw was that they just didn't have this overriding fear or urgency that demanded they finish one project immediately. It's like they were gardening. You know what I mean? And so there was some of that I brought over to whatever, but it was about looking at the clock, literally. It's like, okay, I can spend an hour on this. I'm going to devote this chunk to the book, and then I'm going to spend an hour. But I will tell you, the single most seismic thing I've done for myself recently, which is more of a personal thing, was that I really cut down on my recreational use of social media because it was making me want to jump off a bridge. I was doom scrolling. I would go on there for a marketing reason, and then it's an hour later and I'm reading an article on whether or not you can get the coronavirus from your big toe. And it's like, this is not healthy. I am not. And so I had to bust myself on that. And I had to say, okay, there's a point at which this is work. And then the needle crosses over the line into whatever. And what I found is when I took that out of the picture, I had a lot of free time. I really did. I was looking at, it wasn't about working harder and making myself miserable. It was about looking at where I was making myself miserable with things that were not work, that were making me a little batty.
And as one of your social media followers, I could always tell whenever you're busy doing something because there's never a post or you would just do a little quick quips, which would garner a laugh that would say, hey, I'm still here, but don't forget about me.
Right.
But one of the things I think that you ingeniously have done in using social media to keep readers in touch is your new bathroom library segments that you do.
Bathroom bookstore, right.
Yeah, bathroom bookstore.
We never made one sale, but I call it a bookstore, right.
How did that come about?
Well, I have this really stupid bathroom that makes no sense. I've never understood why it has all these shelves in it. Originally, I bought the place where I live from this guy who was clearly, I don't know if he was coming here to be with women he wasn't married to or what, or men he wasn't married to. I don't know what his deal was, but it has a shower and the walls used to slide back from the bedroom. You could see into the bathroom, and I got rid of that. But part of the bathroom had these weird glass shelves in it. And I would look at these shelves and I would think, you either have to be a shampoo hoarder or I don't know what you would ever put in these shelves. And the shower was in the middle of the room. Like, everything about it was ridiculous. It was like, it may look fun in a movie, but in real life, it was just awful. You were cold every time you used the shower. So finally, I reached a point, I think this was right at the beginning of the pandemic, where I was like, what am I going to do with these shelves? And then it was like, and then you see behind me, these are library push carts, so like rolling books. I have so many books. I'm such a book hoarder that I have to roll these. Also, they're hiding a mess that's behind there that I don't want on camera. But it was like the two ideas connected in my head. Stupid shelves, tons of books. And I never used the shower in that bathroom, so the steam and the water was not an issue. So I was like, I'm going to merchandise it like a bookstore, because I really missed going to the bookstore. I'd go like once a week to Book Soup here in West Hollywood. And so Eric Jacquin said, oh, you can play bookstore in your bathroom. And I think he was just trying to be kind of a jerk and make fun of me. And then I was like, what an excellent idea. And so a video series was born. But the idea behind it in the beginning was, here I am, somebody who works mostly from home, who spends a lot of time in isolation. Maybe I have some helpful tips for people who are not used to sheltering at home for this extended period of time. Well, I ran out of those tips very quickly because we were at home a lot longer than I thought when this first started. So,
well, and with 2020 being a difficult time for many people and being in isolation, has it boosted book sales for you? And how do you keep those readers engaged during this time period? Obviously, with social media is what you're doing.
Book sales across the board have not been negatively impacted by this, which I'm shocked. Now, bookstores, physical bookstores, obviously have been impacted, but book sales are maybe stronger than they were before, and that's been a breath of fresh air for an industry that was really in need of some fresh air. So that's good. I mean, in terms of my particular book sales, I am currently an Amazon author, so we are not reliant on physical bookstores. In fact, most physical bookstores decline to carry Amazon publishing titles because they view Amazon as their competitor. And why would I stock items from my competitor that they can sell at a great discount? So I knew I had a book coming up. Blood Victory came out about a month ago. I knew it wasn't going to be impacted the way some of my friends, just their publications were catastrophes, because they lost this major sales outlet when the stores closed. So that happened, but overall book sales, and I guess that's mostly through online sales, stayed really robust. What I did hear, and we didn't see this necessarily, but I heard that podcast sales took a hit. Earlier we were talking about audiobooks, like I think it was Larry who said he's not driving anywhere, so he's not listening to audiobooks the way he used to. That's apparently true of podcasts. I think that was a big deal with Quibi, that streamer that launched that was doing 10-minute movies. They were designed to be watched in 10-minute increments on the subway. So ironically, after years of being told that everything was about short-form entertainment, in the pandemic, long-form entertainment was what we all needed because we had so much time to kill.
So let's talk about balancing. We've talked about writing. We've talked about you being in the business side. But as a writer, we need to kind of learn how to balance life to a degree. Is there a time that you just shut it all down and just focus on your writing, or just focus on you?
My responsibilities before the pandemic on other projects had gotten to the point where I didn't have the usual book time in the middle of the day that I did. And so I became someone who woke up very early, which I mean, if you had said that to me a few years ago, and I've now conditioned myself that my eyes pop open around 5 a.m. or 5:30. And I'm like, who is this guy? Because I used to be, my joke was the only way I learned how to work up early was by moving west. I kept changing time zones. And so I went from someone, a little wastrel kid who woke up at 10 a.m. living off my parents, to waking up at 8 a.m. on the West Coast, but I had just moved in that direction. So now I woke up early because I came to value that first burst of caffeine, and nobody else is at me yet. The phone isn't ringing. That early hour. I wrote like someone who had kids that were going to wake up, and I live alone. So I got into that habit, and it shifted my most productive writing time early in the day. And I heard an interview with a very successful romance author, Christine Feehan, who writes 2 books at the same time. And they said, how do you do it? And she said, I have a morning book and I have an evening book. And I spend 4 hours on each, and there's a big separation. And the other trick, and I don't know if she said this publicly, but she said it to me when I asked her about it, is I have 2 different computers. So I work on a different laptop on the other book so that I don't get bored, so that I don't have a monotonous visual trigger, like I'm not at the same computer. Not everybody can afford 2 computers, but she can, because she's done well for herself. But I remember talking to a TV showrunner who said she always secured writing rooms where there was a morning office and an afternoon office, because she needed to break up the visuals, during the day. So I think any little tricks you can play on yourself like that can lead to a more productive writing day. But I think there needs to be like a whistle that blows, because otherwise you're always at work. And for me, it's usually about 5 p.m. because 5 p.m. a friend usually calls to check in with me, and we chat for a long time. And that's the cap on my day. With a lot of people who have kids, it's the kids are coming home from school. I don't know if they're at school in these times, but that used to be what it was. I got to get it done by 3 o'clock because the house is no longer mine. And I think it's that is how you can enforce balance. But the hardest thing, this is the hardest thing, and I am not an expert on this topic, is having a safe place to put your brain when you're done that's not entirely about obsessive worry about the book, because there's a point at which it can turn neurotic, and it's like you've got to separate. And I'm like, I have no hobbies. I really don't. That's what the social media thing was about, is that I needed a hobby like candle making or knitting or something. And I've been so resistant, but I've got some coloring books upstairs. They're not very colored, but like that's the thing. I've been set an egg timer for an hour. I'm just going to do something that's low stakes. It's not about producing a result. It's not about worrying about my career, all that sort of stuff. So I think that's helpful too, particularly during these times. And I think it's easier to switch than to shut off. It's easier to switch focus to something else than it is to say, don't focus on that.
So do you use reading as a way of balancing? I mean, whenever you read, what type of book do you read, which probably also influences your writing? Or do you just totally go back and say, no, I'm going to read a comic book and go from there?
Because I see Jackie is waving at us. So
she's probably going to tell me, hurry up.
I didn't want to go off on a long response if Jackie had something to say, but
I'm unmuting her. Hold on one second.
I don't want to get between you two. I don't know what's going on.
That we need to take a last question. That
okay.
It was that we are running.
One last question, and I'm gonna go with the one that Angelin submitted last night. She says that she's really interested in your thoughts on this topic. She says writing was initially a therapeutic exercise, a way to distract her from the pressures of her real career. It gave her a kick to entertain family and friends. But over time, she's grown to be really committed to the mastering of the craft of writing, producing, and more, and building a body of work in which she can look back and be proud of. However, her real career at times sucks all the creativity out of her. She says, I can't afford to quit my day job just yet, but want to work toward a full-time career, and just curious to hear your thoughts on overall balance, which I think you've already given us a lot of detail on it.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's a group of writers that I was following on Twitter that they called themselves the 5 a.m. Writers Club, or maybe it was the 3 a.m. Like they wrote when they could. I think the thing that jumped out at me though about the wording of her question, and I know this is kind of a standard writer's thing to say, is like creativity. Like creativity is sort of an overarching concept, but a lot of it is I have to sit at the computer and force this out today. It's like you don't want to wait for the muse to show up. And so I think if you take the attitude of logging time as opposed to being brilliant, writer's block is about raising the stakes beyond where they need to be. For me, writer's block is about, I've decided rather than writing, I need to be brilliant. I need to have an imaginary fight with the critics who are going to savage my book later. It's like I've left the process in my mind, and that's what writer's block is about. And I think the single thing, and this could maybe be a final thought, is the single most productive thing, the thing that keeps me going, the thing that keeps me from quitting, is realizing I can always edit it later.
Which is always the hard thing for me too. I always think I'm used to just putting it down and going from there. So that's nice to know.
That is great.
Well, Chris, Jackie is giving me the dirty look and telling me that it's time for us to move on. I want to thank you so much for taking a time. I was very honored for you to have joined us, and I really greatly do appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I wish you all the best of luck. Stay safe and healthy and keep writing.
Well, wait a minute. One more thing, Jackie, have to do this because this is one of the things that a writer has to do. I've got to plug his book, and Chris.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, there it is. There's my website.
Okay.
Yeah, look at that. I love that cover.
It is lovely.
Amazon does good covers.
Jackie, I've got you.
You muted Jackie.
I know.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Chris. That was wonderful. Yeah, that was great advice. And I particularly enjoyed how you balance.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was a very hit home thing for me. And I'm sure it was for a lot of people. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye, guys. Take care.
Maybe I'll see you in the grocery store.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I'll be the one with the mask. All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Okay, so for everyone else, hang around, or those who are in Malice and wish to find out some Malice business, hang on. Those who are not in Malice can go ahead and sign out or listen in and see what we've got going on. Jackie?
Thank you. I want to once again bring up the anthology. Those of you who still have stories pending, take care of that business right away. Angela